All right, I'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm McKenna Hollinger. I'm currently finishing my engineering prerequisites and the majority of my technical electives at Columbus State Community College. I hope to start studying computer science and engineering at OSU next year. I'm currently a digital transformation intern for Race to Space, a Columbus-based nonprofit organization that focuses on providing educators and students with the tools necessary to initiate civil discourse and connect those from otherwise disparate communities. And civil discourse is the skill that is developed to have a disagreement with another person, but not allow emotional tensions to break that conversation apart. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. We have a lot to uncover. So as engineers, our job is kind of to deconstruct and reconstruct ideas in the way that we take pre-existing natural laws and we deconstruct those concepts, and then we reconstruct them to fit the concept that we're trying to face, the problem we're trying to solve. And throughout my time at Race the Space, I've launched a social media campaign that follows 4 steps of deconstructing and reconstructing false narratives in our society that prevent human progress. So the steps are truth, discourse, action, and reflection. And those are the 4 steps that I'm going to be going through today in order to give my presentation. So the first step is truth. Although the dictionary defines truth as being in accordance with fact or reality, it doesn't account for when perception and reality don't align. Your experiences may develop your ideology, but how do you know if your ideology is developed? Despite being individualistic, truths intertwine to create collective consciousness, which in turn influences other truths. So really each of us as an individual embody a truth from all the experiences we've had in our own unique lives. And I ask that everyone take a deep breath for a second because we're gonna get into some pretty interesting material. So you may have seen this graph before. Every time the College Board releases its performance statistics of the year, Mark Perry, the conservative think tank, the American Enterprise Institute, loves to remind readers that boys are better than girls at math, despite that not being what the graph quantitatively measures. This graph is just measuring SAT math test scores. It doesn't go into the deep educational history of these individuals. It's just a snapshot of a couple of hours in a classroom. Yet people love to take this graph and share it as indisputable evidence for an invalid claim. Instead of jumping to conclusions with insufficient evidence, people like Perry should be questioning why there's such a disparity instead of jumping to those conclusions, and why there's the disparity between gender and performance on math sections for nationalized standardized tests. Rolling Our Experiences, a Columbus-based nonprofit organization dedicated to researching girls' relationship with STEM subjects, conducted a study on thousands of girls across the country and surveyed them on their confidence and their interest in STEM over time. They found that despite girls' interest in pursuing a career in math or science increases 16% from 5th to 9th grade, yet there's a 15% decline in girls' perceived abilities in math and science. Specifically, from 5th to 9th grade, there's a 26% drop in girls' confidence levels. So let's say a girl had 100% confidence in herself and her math abilities. By the time she's through high school, it will drop to 74%. So she went from what would be an A+ to a C within the span of 4 years. So there's obviously something going on there. A factor in this drop may be the unproportionate amount of girls who are publicly or privately humiliated by a teacher for engaging with course material. Within our own SWE chapter from the survey I conducted, 47.2% of those who completed my survey reported that they had been publicly or privately embarrassed by a teacher for this very reason. I know that I faced that myself. Going through school, specifically freshman year of high school, I was in a class with, it was predominantly male, most of them were a year older than me, and we were learning about probability. and no one was really engaging with the material. The teacher was trying to engage with the class, so I kind of stepped in and was answering questions, and one of the answers was 100% probability. So I rose my hand and told the teacher that, and in response, he said, if you answer a question again, there's a 100% probability we're gonna have a problem here. And after that, I never rose my hand again in that class and really turned away from math, just from the sheer humiliation of it. And obviously, a lot of different people in our SWE chapter and girls across the nation have endured similar stories such as this. And teachers tend to single out girls and incorporate these ideas into their minds that they're not as good at math than boys, but that's just simply not true. Gender similarities characterize math performance was a study conducted way back in 2008. And even then, they found that on math assessments for elementary through 6th grade, those students, despite gender, they all performed similarly, and same with statewide standards-based math tests. So they also perform well on standardized state math tests, which are more connected to their curriculum than the national standardized tests, which have to do more with just these random concepts that aren't necessarily taught extensively in the classroom. And girls often outperform boys when it comes to grades, in math as well. But boys are decided to be better at math than girls just because they perform better on national standardized math tests. And we can see that in our society, it's been determined that high school GPA is inconsistent because different schools with different socioeconomic statuses have different resources for their students, so they perform differently. But the University of Chicago, just last year in 2020, conducted research on 40 public schools within the Chicago system, and they measured high school GPA against ACT score and which metric more contributed to a student's success in college and their graduation rates. And it's actually found that high school GPA contributed to more than ACT scores. And you can even see, for the ACT scores, each line there are the 40 schools that they were researching, and the bold line is the average. And you can even see that the students who got above a 30 on the ACT, it didn't necessarily determine whether or not they would be graduating college within 4 to 6 years. So pretty much they've been using an inconsistent, they've claimed that high school GPA is inconsistent when the ACT is actually what is inconsistent. But as of right now, this is the only study of its kind, which shocks me. So hopefully more data will come out in the future, but I'm confident that it will demonstrate the same trends. And here we can see, you know, the more likely that you're gonna pursue STEM, it really stems from the confidence that you have in your math abilities. And I actually made a mistake on this chart. It's supposed to be men and women are flipped. Women get 6.7% of STEM degrees, while men get 17%. So you can already see there's a huge disparity there. And for STEM, it's supposed to be something that reflects the whole entire population. So with women only getting 6.7% of degrees and men getting 17%, there's not only a huge disparity in the degrees earned, but that leads to the wage gap, since STEM degrees tend to be more higher paying than a different degree statistically. And we see that the percentage of women in the STEM workforce is less than 30%, despite them making up 47% of the general workforce. So it's not matching how many women make up the workforce, and there's a difference of about 20% there. And we can see that STEM has been one of the most highly growing fields out there, yet as you can see, all occupations, the fields have increased by 34%, but STEM occupations have skyrocketed with an increase in 79%. Yet there are less people who are studying computers, specifically women, despite there being an increase in the jobs and an increase in the pay for computer operations. So it went from 32% in 1990 down to 25% in 2016, despite more women getting a college degree than men. And this can be attributable to typing in the 90s. In the early 80s and before, typing was a very valuable skill since not everyone had access to computers. And at the time, women were primarily doing administrative tasks. So typing was very valuable and they were able to carry that over to a computer field. But unfortunately, well, that hasn't become as valuable of a skill with the accessibility to computers in the modern day. And now we can move on to the next step. So discourse is individual truths, us as individuals, composing the collective consciousness and us engaging in discussion regarding a truth, a false narrative, gritty but respectful. We're just gonna go outside our comfort zone as we test the integrity of our ideological foundations by going into why is it so important that women are in computer fields? What's the big deal about it? So you can see from this graph here that it demonstrates throughout the recent years with the accessibility of the computer, just how big of disparity there is between men and women in computer fields. And you can also see that there's subsections for different demographics. You can see that the amount of white women has decreased over time, while there has not been much of a difference in minorities within women, and it's actually decreased over time as well, while you see that there's an increase in men. So again, how is it that technology, something that we're all supposed to use to better our lives, how is it supposed to better the lives of 100% of people when the population isn't being accurately represented? How is there accountability for the people in charge for the policies and algorithms that they decide to include in their product when they are likely not to be of a minority, especially not a woman, and especially not a woman of color? So how are they supposed to be held accountable for when they enact practices that further hurt minorities that were already being hurt in the first place? And this is something that Carol Cadwalder, a writer for The Guardian, dives into her article, Google Democracy and the Truth About Google Search, in which she reenacts a moment where she was just bored at night and was looking up all these things in the Google search engine. And she looked up "Are Jews?" and immediately the first result was "Are Jews evil?" And when she clicked on that, 8 out of the 10 pages that resulted supported Jews being evil, despite that just not being true whatsoever. And here's a screenshot of what happened when she looked up "Are women evil?" And you can see that one of the links, the top link, the text underneath says, "Every woman has some degree of prostitute in her. Every woman has a little evil in her." And this just goes to show that Google is reinforcing the confirmation bias, which is when you go and seek information that already confirms a belief that you had before, and how it is preventing there being facts being spread about women not being evil and that anyone can really be evil, and it doesn't have anything to do with appearance whatsoever. And this just goes to show, this was in 2016 that it was written. We see 5 years later the effects of this kind of bias that people are confirming and how we've gotten to this point where we are. And I even went last night and looked up engineer in Google Images, and it makes it pretty clear. Most of these, all of these really are just stock photos. And you can see that there's the same woman in two pictures. So that's not accurate representation. There's stock photos in the first place, so it's not images of the natural environment where you would see different people interacting. And you can see that men are the ones pointing their finger, providing direction, while there's not really any, there's no woman of color, there's some people of color, but it's just not, it's not real. It's all just doctored, and there's a term for that, it's called tokenism, when you take someone, whether it be a woman, woman of color, man of color, and use them in photos in order to make your cause seem more diverse when really it's not, it's just a photo op. And using those people as an opportunity to make more money when you're not actually representing the true population of your workforce. And a big reason why we are where we are today, and going back to Carol Cadwalder, so the most efficient way for us to obtain knowledge, obviously, is through Google. And nowadays, we live in the information era. Our economy is entirely based off the spread of information and the selling of data from companies to the government to foreign governments. And longtime psychology researcher Robert Epstein explains by applying ranking bias to search engine results, which we just saw with the pictures of Carol Cadwalder's Google search. We see that the recommendations that appear below are based off of popularity and not necessarily what's factual. And due to that, they can have a strong and undetectable influence on the preference of undecided users. So someone who would just be legitimately on the fence, let's say even a child, thinking, are women evil? They go and look that up. They see 8 out of the 10 pages confirm that women are evil, so they go on to believe that, despite maybe not even having read the articles that resulted. And this isn't just true for Google, it's also true for YouTube as well. Specifically, in 2018, Matthew Patrick, he is known for his YouTube channel, The Game Theorist, and he's not just a YouTuber. So he went to Duke University, graduated summa cum laude with a degree in psychology, and he responded to an event that happened in 2018. You all may have heard of it. It was just at the turn of the year. So Logan Paul, very famous YouTuber, obviously, he was in Japan at the time, and he went to this forest that's famous for being known as a place where people go to commit suicide. And he decided that he was going to record himself going there because it would be a huge hit for views. And when he went there, he stumbled upon a body of someone who had just recently committed suicide, and he got it all on tape, and he put it on his YouTube channel, this dead body, and even put it in the thumbnail so that he'd get attention. And immediately there was response all over from media outlets condemning Paul for his action, other people condemning him for his actions, but Patrick goes on to point out the issue there is that the way the YouTube algorithm works, it's similar to the Google algorithm since it's a subsidiary of Google, and it recommends videos based off of what is popular in Google News, regardless as to whether or not it's positive or negative. So what ended up happening was the apology video of Logan Paul went more viral than the suicide video. And not only that, but videos about the reaction videos to Logan Paul led the algorithm to think, oh my gosh, this guy did something absolutely amazing. Let's just recommend him everywhere. So he, from putting a video up of someone who had just recently committed suicide, not only that, but in the thumbnail, he made more money than he ever had doing YouTube from doing such an unethical and horrible thing. And even though this was in 2018, this still proves true today. Specifically, you may know him, Morgan Wallen. He is currently at #1 on the Billboard charts for music, and it has been for 9 weeks, despite just a few months ago saying racial slurs on video. And not only that, but refusing to wear a mask when he was going to perform for Saturday Night Live and was disinvited from there because of it. And despite all the controversial things he's done, and he also has a history of crime as well, he is making more money than he ever has in his career. And I was searching through last night, and his videos have dozens of millions of views. So each time someone clicks on a video, even if they're just trying to learn more about who he is from the news that was published about him, he gains more revenue from that curiosity. And this situation dives into the action and what we as individuals can do regarding diversity and inclusion in tech. And assessing one's ideological foundations is one level of commitment, while acting upon a development in it is another. In order to impact the collective consciousness, one must take action, or others aren't likely to question their own truth. It's a chain reaction. If someone is going to take action, others will be inspired to do so. And especially when it comes to algorithms, if they're to put that on their media, then that's just going to spread and be the change that you want to see in the world, even if it's baby steps. And the first thing to really understand is that the technology that we use today is not like the technology prior to the 90s. Systems were mostly analog. I mean, even books count as technology because it's a tool that we use to better our lives. And the thing is that when you're reading a book, you have to consciously read through the text, read through the pages. And a lot of the time it's an author who's a human being framing an argument in a certain way, using data. Meanwhile, with Google, it is not analog. It is based off of previous searches that have been performed in algorithms that we do not know how they work because it's not open source. And there's been some research that has been released about it, and the engineers that published an article on it even said that a key advantage of using deep neural networks as a generalization of matrix factorization is that arbitrary, continuous, and categorical features can be easily added to the model. So more simply put, deep neural networks, algorithms modeled after the human brain, predict an output from an input of data given patterns acquired from past experience. So ultimately, inanimate programs born from code can experience and induce psychological phenomena because they're configured to learn and function like humans. So the question that you may be thinking now is, what does this have to do with diversity in tech and women? So the way that it connects is that the way we often talk about people in the computer field, we often romanticize Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, the picture right there. And we often dwell over their successes without looking to what led to their success. And you can see on the right, this is Miss Goldberg, and she, way back in the 70s, created a static programming language called Smalltalk. And Smalltalk was able to set a prototype for the screen applications on the Mac. So pretty much she wanted to make it so that computers could be accessibly used by anyone. You didn't have to go through the terminal in order to perform commands. Instead, you could just work with these icons that very clearly show what their purpose is. And that is what went on to inspire Steve Jobs to incorporate it into the system. And the Mac is known to be revolutionary with its desktop in the way that it's so accessible for users of all ages. Yet we never really talk about her. Steve Jobs gets most of the spotlight, but you would never see her pop up in a Google search related to Steve Jobs, despite how much she contributed to his success. So that's one thing that we need to change, is the way that we think about these people that we put on a pedestal and look up to, and whether or not their successes also involve the success of other people who haven't been really studied throughout history because they're of a minority, and she's a woman, so a lot of people don't talk about her and her contributions when obviously they were monumental. And another thing to consider regarding pedestals is oftentimes students as well as graduates will make it their goal to work for a FAANG company. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I will say that they're often romanticized for how diverse they are. But despite spending billions of dollars on diversity, equity, and inclusion, you can see here from this graph that from 2014 to 2020, there's not really been a big change in specifically the amount of Black workers in big tech. You can see that it caps off at 9% for the graph, and it may look like there's big growth, but keep in mind that's only a few percent for the billions of dollars they're investing into what is now an industry. And in 2014, Google spent $114 million on diversity, equity, and inclusion, yet Black employees only made up 3.3% of their total workforce, 2.1% of their tech workforce, and 2.6% of leadership. And now we get to the point where we have to consider companies are spending more money than ever on diversity and inclusion, yet there's not really tangible results. Their recruiting is increasing the percentage, but the percentage is nowhere near matching the actual population. Like, Black people in America make up about 13% of the population, yet they're only making up 8% of Google's workers. And consider before how we were discussing how algorithms happen and how they're based off the popularity of searches in the past and how that affects those groups. And yet Google is still using those algorithms despite spending so much money on the diversity and inclusion that they don't consider, maybe they don't want to work for their company because of the stereotypes and just the hate that those algorithms bring to people who are trying to confirm beliefs that they already had in the first place. And reality is, as well as affirmative action is important. I will say that. It is helping meet a present desperate need that we have in our society of increasing the amount of people, of minorities in tech, as well as other companies, in order for there to be accurate representation. But at the same time, consider that through affirmative action, only a minority of a minority is being affected. And although it's an improvement, the reality is that there's still so many girls out there, so many people of color who are being barred from fields like tech and STEM that are high-paying fields that would close up the wage gap. Yet they're just really only doing so much in the present when they could be spending some of their money as well on research for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also corporate lobbying is the biggest thing that they could do. Consider that the median age of the 117th Congress is 62 years old. That's not even average, so it's not even skewed. That's just 62 years old. That is so close to retirement. And you can see as well that we have the most diverse Congress we've had. in history. Yet you see that the percentages still do not match the percentages of minorities within our population. And you can see that white Americans make up the larger share of Congress than the US population. And also keep in mind that only 24% of senators are women. So how are we supposed to expect that these people who are creating our laws are the ones who would enforce response to unethical algorithms really have no idea about what's going on, because a lot of these people are at the age where they're not familiar with these kind of technologies, and most senators have not studied computer science at all. And this really goes back to the point of women not being confident enough to continue to study computer science. And give me 1 second, my cat is stopped. The percent of SWE members who've considered changing course of study due to lack of peer faculty support is over 50%. It's an overwhelming majority. And we can see that when we have people in Congress who are not accurately representing our population, how are we supposed to have it that within our education system, it is enforced that it is a supportive and inclusive environment for all, especially when it comes to historically unrepresented fields such as STEM for women and people of color? And also, it's not just a matter of getting these people involved in STEM and providing them with the resources to get into it, but also the retention, because a lot of women end up leaving STEM as well as tech because 48% of women working in tech experience harassment compared to 11% of men. That's a 37% difference, more than a third. And 42% of women reported witnessing harassment, and 42% said their harassment was perpetrated by a supervisor. So they're so much less likely to report what's happening because the person that they're supposed to trust to do the right thing to protect them is the one who's hurting them in the first place, because they're in a position of power where there isn't accountability in our society. And until there's accountability, we're not going to be able to have the essential diversity that we need in order to have our society progress and have it have equity for everyone, because it's not accurately representing the population. So who's going to keep these people accountable? And I also recommend that on an individual basis, that you all go and check out Project Implicit. It's a project that's been run by Harvard for over a decade now, and it really demonstrates bias from an individual. And it doesn't just have it when it comes to skin color, it also does it for people of size and all kinds, because we all have a little bit of bias in us, and especially with the amount of algorithms that are out there that unconsciously affect us, it is so crucial that we try and understand ourselves and our perception of the world in order to try and fix it so that it contributes to a truthful narrative. And the last step is reflection. So for one's ideology to mature long-term, one must consciously consider how these steps impacted their beliefs and everyday actions. Not only that, but reflection allows one to gain closure as well as a more holistic perspective. And really the takeaway of this presentation is there's no justice without racial justice and gender equality. And I would especially like to point out the attacks that have happened in Atlanta and San Francisco on the Asian American Pacific Islander community throughout this week and the last few years, quite frankly, and how these dangerous stereotypes have been brought into fruition by the government that's supposed to accurately represent our population, because they don't. And when you have algorithms on Google that are talking about the Chinese virus, that's so dangerous. And the fact that Congress is not representative of our population means that there's really nobody holding them accountable. So please keep in mind throughout the upcoming weeks that we do not have a Congress that reflects us, and to keep in mind that elections are coming up in the future, and to make sure to inform yourself on who you're voting for and making sure that they support racial justice and gender equality, or else we're not really going to have a change in the algorithms that are affecting people. And there's no racial justice without algorithmic justice. And without diversity in tech, there's no sustainable future, because there will not be a future where these discriminatory practices that already target already marginalized communities are going to be held accountable for their actions. And that's all I have. Thank you so much for listening.
Thanks so much, McKenna. Does anyone have any questions for McKenna? I did want to ask, I think you mentioned at the beginning that you had some sort of like social media campaign that you had worked with. Is there like somewhere that we can find that, or like follow that work that you've done?
Let me grab it right now. It's on the Raceless Space Instagram. Also, I apologize for the moments where I lost my train of thought for a second. My cat was trying to play with me while giving a presentation. Not very helpful. Thanks, Bridget. Yeah, he was very engaged with the course material. All right, I sent the link right there, and we post weekly. So I'm not the one writing it anymore. I kind of set the foundations for it, and the slides I shared with the definitions, I passed it on to our 2 writing interns, so we're kind of running that now. But this week we're focusing on mental health, especially throughout the pandemic, and how it affects different demographics. Because unfortunately there has been an increase of suicides within our community. So make sure that you're reaching out to your friends and checking in on everyone throughout quarantine, and we're almost out of it. So just make sure you're